The NBA playoffs are about a week away, and while most of the talk is focused on the Western Conference, I want to spend some time today talking about the dumpster fire that is the Eastern Conference. Besides the dominant Celtics, seeds 2 through 8 in the East all have their flaws and inconsistencies, to the point where we may see another play-in team in the Eastern Conference Finals, and maybe in the NBA Finals. So today, let's go through the middle of the East and weed out the pretenders and shine a light on the contenders. But before we get started, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel as we're on the road to 500 subscribers. It would be greatly appreciated and help recommend this type of content to NBA fans. So remember to leave a like and subscribe, and let's dive into the East's second best team, the Milwaukee Bucks. I say the Bucks are the second best team in the East only based on pedigree and not based on anything I've seen this season. My expectations were obviously high for a team led by Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, but the alarm started going off in my head when their defense was in the bottom 5 the first 2 months of the season. And those alarms only got louder when Adrian Griffin was fired in the middle of the season for Doc Rivers, because rarely in NBA history has a contender fired their head coach during the regular season and seen playoff success expected of the Bucks. And while that Milwaukee defense has gotten slightly better since Doc took over, their record is 15-17 with Rivers as a head coach, and they've all of a sudden dropped to the 3 seed and will have to face the Pacers in the first round, a team that has had their number this season that added Pascal Siakam since the last time they faced off. There's a strong possibility the Bucks will fall in the first round of the playoffs for the second year in a row. But for the Bucks to make a playoff run expected of a team with 2 superstars, they're going to need a couple things to go their way. First and most obviously, the Bucks need Giannis and Dame to show up and show out. But we just don't know when Giannis will be back from his injury, and I don't trust the 2024 version of Dame to take the reins as the first option against a team as talented as the Pacers. Secondly, the Bucks are going to need their role players to play well. Not the most groundbreaking analysis here, but pieces like Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, and Pat Connaughton know what it takes to win a title on the Bucks, and they're going to need to play at a championship level for the Bucks to succeed. But here's where things are probably going to go wrong for the Bucks. In the playoffs, when the shooting goes cold and the defense tightens up, teams that generally succeed can score well in the paint. And while the Bucks shoot 58% from twos, the second best mark in the league, they only take about 51 two-pointers a game, which is 26th in the NBA. The Bucks need to develop a post presence for the playoffs just in case their shooters go cold. But the odds of that happening in such a short amount of time are slim to none. And honestly, I could see Milwaukee going home in April to a somewhat flawed Pacers team despite having one of the 3 best players in the world. A team that is almost the exact opposite of the Bucks or the Orlando Magic, who are surprisingly the 5th seed in the East because of their defensive culture and excellent coaching. What's impressed me the most about this Magic team is their slow pace, because it's not normal to see a team as young as the Magic have the composure to slow the game down and play at their tempo. And as a result, Orlando allows the least amount of field goal attempts a game, force the second most turnovers a game, and give up only 108.4 points per game on average, which is 3rd in the NBA. So the Magic's defense is great, but here's where things start to get a little tricky. See, everyone loves a young team making noise in the playoffs, but let's think back to a team that I think really resembles this Orlando Magic team, and that's the 2017-2018 Celtics, who made a playoff run with Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward injured. You have 2 budding forwards in Tatum and Brown and Paolo and Wagner, the defensive star in Marcus Smart and Jalen Suggs, and the spark plug off the bench in Terry Rozier and Cole Anthony. Some of those pieces were better than their counterpart version at that time, but both versions were inexperienced and had one of the best defenses in the league. But since 2018, the East has changed a lot. And while I like this Magic team, I just don't think they have enough to make a deep run in the playoffs. What I'm most concerned about is their stagnant offense, which is statistically one of the 10 worst in the entire league. They can't hit their threes, they're average at hitting their twos, and while they get to the line almost 25 times a game, the most in the NBA, they only hit 76% of those attempts, which is 27th in the league. The Magic's defense will absolutely keep them in games, but when it's time to actually hit the big shots, I just don't trust them. This experience will hopefully prove to be valuable for such a young team, and in a couple of seasons, they could absolutely make some noise in the playoffs. But for now, their ceiling likely lies in the second round. Thankfully for the Magic, their first round opponent is the easiest of the top 4 seeds out east, and that's the Cleveland Cavaliers. Look, their run in January was magical, as without Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, Cleveland won all but 3 of their games from the start of January to the All-Star break, with Donovan Mitchell and Jarrett Allen looking like superstars. But since the All-Star break, with Mitchell dealing with an injury and Garland and Mobley disappointing compared to their preseason expectations, the Cavs have been sliding and lost really bad games to the Bulls, Nets, and Hornets. But instead of just completely discrediting the Cavaliers, let me focus on the good a little bit more. The Cavaliers still have a really good starting 5 that has a really nice combination of shooting, playmaking, and defense. And what I'm going to focus on here is that defense, because as their 2-star guards are obviously more proficient on the offensive side of the ball, the Cavs' 2 defensive studs, Mobley and Allen, are really good at preventing opposing teams from taking and making 2-point shots. And because of their size up front, the Cavs don't allow many second chance points or offensive rebounds, limiting opposing teams' possessions and maximizing the amount of possessions they have in a game. Offensively, the charge is led by Donovan Mitchell, who would have been an All-NBA guy if it weren't for the amount of games he's missed this season, and Darius Garland, who will be the X factor for how far this team goes in the playoffs. And besides their stars, the Cavs have solid depth that can shoot and defend. So in theory, this should be a team that competes for an Eastern Conference Finals berth. But they're not. And in all honesty, they scare me the most out of any team in the top 6 of the standings in the NBA. We've seen how poorly JB Bickerstaff has coached Cleveland this season, and with reports coming out that his job is on the line this season, he's really going to need to step it up in these next couple of weeks. Outside of coaching, as good as their 4 stars are together, they just don't fit well. Mobley and Allen are both great defensive players, but both kind of play the same role on that side of the ball. And yes, Garland and Mitchell in theory should have an extremely positive rating on offense, but when they're on the court together, their numbers say they're average offensively and above average defensively, which I think we can all agree feels backwards. This team just has a bunch of really good players that only somewhat fit together, and when you play a series against a team that's played well for all 82 games, I think it's obvious the Cavs are going to struggle. I'll drop more analysis on the first round of the playoffs later in the week, but just know that at this moment, I'm completely out on the Cavs. But the one team in that 2-5 range that I think will make the most noise in the playoffs are the Knicks. Despite dealing with major injuries to 3 of their starters this season, the Knicks have thrived thanks to the outstanding play by Jalen Brunson and company, and as a result, have a pretty easy path to the conference finals. From just a team standpoint, the Knicks by far have the most team chemistry in the East on both sides of the ball. But what really stands out for New York's team is their defense, highlighted by lockdown defenders at almost every position on the court. And while they score only 112.7 points per game, which is 20th in the NBA, it's not due to a lack of scoring options or poor shooting. It's because they play the slowest pace in all of basketball and don't put up the amount of shot attempts top offenses in this league do. So when we put all offenses on an even playing field, through looking at the Knicks' offensive rating, they actually sit at the 8th best offense in the league, which is extremely impressive considering their second option, Julius Randle, has been out for half the season. But speaking of Randle, here's where things could go down for the Knicks. With Randle out for the remainder of the season due to an injury to his right shoulder, the Knicks are down an offensive threat for the playoffs, which could prove to be their downfall considering the high-level defenses they will play. But what the Knicks have that other teams don't is a guy named Jalen Brunson, who's been playing like one of the 15 best players in basketball all season long. And if he can keep up this level of play in the playoffs, I don't think there's a team that could contain the Knicks on offense, especially considering how many good shooters and secondary scorers at the forward position New York has. If they had Randle, I'd be much more confident in their chances to make an Eastern Conference Finals. But for now, their ceiling is still one of the highest in the East, which I'm sure makes Knicks fans happy. Now let's focus our attention on the 6th seed out east, the Indiana Pacers, who have had a truly up and down season so far, with their highs being really high and their lows being pretty low. But now, months after the Pascal-Siakam trade, the Pacers seem to have settled into their final form, and that's being a really good team whose high-powered offense can beat you on any given night. And 2 months ago, this is where I would have had that part of my analysis where I talk about their horrid defense that on the season is ranked in the bottom 10 of the league. But something has clicked recently with the Pacers, so much so that as their offense has stayed at the top of the league, their defense has actually risen to be league average. And if they keep that up in the playoffs, they're going to be a tough out, especially if their offense is as electric as it was in the regular season. I mean, just listen to some of these stats. The Pacers are first in field goals made, first in team field goal percentage, first in 2-point field goals made, first in 2-point field goal percentage, first in team assists, and first in points per game, averaging 122.9 per contest. Those numbers are not normal, and no matter who they face, even the more defensive-oriented teams, it's going to be tough to stop them. What each game will really come down to is pace. The defensive-oriented teams in the East like to play at a slow, methodical pace, and the Pacers like to run in transition and get quick buckets. What the Pacers season is going to come down to is whether they can keep their fast-paced play style alive when playing a more defensive-oriented team. And if they can, the Pacers may be one of the toughest teams to take out in the East. But a team right behind Indiana in the standings is the Philadelphia 76ers, who have recently looked incredible after the return of Joel Embiid. The Sixers came out the gates playing well, with Embiid dominating the competition and looking to defend his MVP. But after Embiid went down with an injury in late January, the Sixers slid from a top 4 seed with a 29-17 record to a 39-35 record as a 7th seed in late March. But since Embiid came back in April, the Sixers have won 6 in a row, and all of a sudden look like a team that could very well upset a top seed in the East. But like with every other team, the Sixers have their downfall, with my primary concern with them being Embiid's health. If you've been watching these games, it's clear that Embiid just hasn't looked up to game speed yet, and that's no fault on his part. When you deal with a major injury to your meniscus, I wouldn't expect Embiid to be game ready right out the gates. But when the playoffs start and the Sixers need Embiid to dominate every single game, I just don't know if he will have the ability to perform at the level we expect him to against a high-level team like the Knicks or Celtics. But with an excellent playoff experienced coach in Nick Nurse guiding this team, and with a great supporting cast surrounding the reigning MVP, the Sixers could easily make it through the first round and put up a fight against a top-seeded team in the second round. And finally, we have to talk about the 8th seed in the East, the Miami Heat. The Heat are pulling a classic move by taking the regular season lightly and playing at their full strength in the playoffs. But with changes to the roster from last year's finals team, the Heat have struggled in the regular season even more in 2024 than in years past, and as a result, they suffered some bad losses as of late to the Mavericks and Pacers. And now, they have to get through the surging 76ers in the first play-in game to become the 7th seed, or one of the Hawks or Bulls in the second play-in game to become the 8th seed. But even with that, we've seen time and time again the Heat dig their way out of a hole and take the best teams in the East to tough playoff series. And as long as the Heat have Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo to lead the way on both sides of the ball, the Heat are going to be a dangerous team to beat in April and May. And then we get to the 9 and 10 seeds, the Hawks and Bulls, but I won't spend any time on those teams because I think we all know that these teams are likely not making the playoffs, and if they do, they're going to get smoked by the Celtics. Obviously, Boston will be the prohibitive favorite to represent the East in the NBA Finals. But the reason why I decided to make a video about these teams is that after the Celtics, the East is wide open for any team to take. And for the first time, maybe ever, any one of those teams in the lower side of the bracket, meaning the 2-7 and 3-6 matchups, could make the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe even make the NBA Finals. But what do you think? Comment below your thoughts on the team that will surprise people in the East, and remember to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with instant playoff reactions and analysis. Until then, I'm Julian with TalkBackSports, and I'll see you next time.